Hi, welcome back to my book club. If you're new here, hi, my name is Hunter. I'm a therapist, and together we're reading The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. Today's video is Chapter 6, The Never-Ending Stories. Before we begin, if you need caught up on the previous videos, head to the link in the description and make sure to hit like for this video and subscribe. I put out new videos every Tuesday as we go through The Happiness Trap. If you're curious about any other resources with The Happiness Trap, I have links in the description as well. Without further ado, let's get started. Harris starts the chapter by talking about the never-ending stories that we say inside our mind, asking the question, does your mind ever say similar things to you? Stuff like, I'm not as smart as others, I don't fit in, or I'm too selfish. Harris says, the fact is, negative thoughts are normal. For reasons discussed in Chapter 1, we all have lots of negative thoughts. In fact, research shows that about 80% of our thoughts have some degree of negative content. So if your mind does a lot of negative thinking, welcome to the club. The next part, the great storyteller. We humans rely a lot on these words inside our head. Our thoughts tell us about our life and how to live it, what to do and what to avoid. And yet, they are nothing more or less than words. In ACT, we refer to thoughts as stories. Most of our thoughts are neither true nor false. Most of them are either stories about how we see life, called opinions, beliefs, or morals, or about what we want to do with it, called plans, strategies, or goals. The way ACT helps us to deal with these thoughts is different from many other psychological models. Our main interest in any given thought is, does this thought have something useful to offer us? If we let this thought guide us, will it help us to build the life we want to live? But hang on a minute, Harris hears you say. Aren't negative thoughts harmful or bad for us? The answer is no. Negative thoughts are never, in and of themselves, harmful or bad for you. You've probably been told many times that negative thoughts are both abnormal and harmful. And if you've bought into these extremely popular myths, you're in for a surprise. Let's talk about negative thoughts. Many psychological approaches regard negative thoughts as a major problem. Such approaches usually advise you to struggle against your thoughts as follows. Get rid of, distract, push the thoughts away, or argue with the thoughts, making them more positive. And the reality is, even if they do give you short-term relief, they do not permanently get rid of negative stories. Harris makes sure to say, there's no delete button in the brain. You may have heard of neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself. The brain doesn't change by subtraction, it changes by addition, by laying down new neural pathways on top of the old ones. So we can't simply delete these unwanted thoughts, but we can lay down new neural pathways that enable us to respond differently, so that when these thoughts do inevitably reappear, we can acknowledge them and allow them to freely come and stay and go without getting hooked. A different approach. Negative thoughts are not a problem in and of themselves. They only become problematic when we react to them in obey mode. In obey mode, we give our thoughts our undivided attention or treat them as commands we must obey. The technical term for responding to our thoughts in this way is fusion. To say we are hooked by or fused with our thoughts basically means they dominate us. They either dominate our awareness, worrying, obsessing, or lost in thought, or they dominate our physical actions, pulling us into self-defeating patterns of behavior. To get a better sense of this, try the 3-part experiment below. The hands as thought experiment. Part A. Imagine that in front of you is everything that matters, the enjoyable, pleasing parts of life, and the difficult, unpleasant aspects of life. Now put your hands together, palms up, as if they are the pages of an open book, and imagine they are comprised of all your thoughts, images, and memories. Part B. When you reach the end of this paragraph, raise your hands to your face until they are totally covering your eyes. Look around you and notice what your view of the world is like as you peer through these gaps between your fingers. So that's what it's like to be totally hooked by your thoughts. When those hands were covering your eyes, how much were you missing out on? How difficult would it have been to focus on things? When we're hooked by our thoughts, it's difficult for us to focus on or engage in what we're doing, hard to appreciate the enjoyable parts of life, and almost impossible to respond effectively to the problems and challenges we face. Which leads to part C. Again, imagine your hands are your thoughts and raise your hands to your face, covering your eyes, and look at the world around you. Then ever so slowly lower your hands to your lap, noticing how your view of the world changes. With genuine curiosity, look around you and notice what you see and hear. With your hands on your lap, how much easier is it to focus on engage in the world around you? This is what it's like to unhook from our thoughts. Technically in ACT, this is known as diffusion. And notice, your hands are still there. You haven't chopped them off or thrown them away. So if there's something useful you can do with them, like driving a car or cooking dinner, you're free to do so. But if there's nothing useful you can do with them, you just let them sit there. And the same goes for our thoughts. If we can make good use of them, let's do so. Even our most painful negative thoughts often have at least some useful information for us. But if there's nothing useful we can do with them, we just let them sit there. This next part is a continuation from chapter 3. But I don't want to let them sit there, said Michelle. I want to get rid of them. Of course you do, Harris replied. Who wouldn't want to get rid of all those negative thoughts? And haven't you been trying hard for years to do that? Positive thinking, prayer, distraction, drinking, avoiding people and places that trigger these thoughts? You have struggled long and hard against these thoughts. So are you ready to try something radically different? Harris said. Yes, Michelle replied. But first, can you explain something? Why do our minds say these things? Your mind is like an overly helpful friend. Have you ever had one of those overly helpful friends who was trying so hard to help you they actually became a nuisance? Well, when your mind is saying these unhelpful things to you, it's actually trying to help. To understand this better, let's take a look at some common categories of thought that repeatedly tend to hook us. Past and future. Our mind continually pulls us into the future, worrying, catastrophizing, and predicting the worst. Why? Well, this is your mind preparing you, saying, look out, you might get hurt, protect yourself. Or our mind frequently pulls us into the past, ruminating, dwelling on painful past events, or blaming ourselves or others. This is your mind trying to help you learn from these past events. It's saying, bad stuff happened. You need to learn from this so you're ready and prepared. Judgments. This is good. That's bad. Life sucks. These feelings are awful. These judgments are your mind's attempts to map out the world for you, to point out what's safe and good and highlight what's unsafe and bad. Reasons. Earlier, we discussed how our mind is like a reason-giving machine. As soon as we think about doing something uncomfortable, challenging, or anxiety-provoking, it cranks out all these reasons why we can't do it. This may take the form of worry, something bad might happen, hopelessness, it won't work, or meaninglessness, there's no point. All these reasons serve the same dual purpose. Your mind is trying to spare you from uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, or from trying out new things in case you get hurt. Another example is rules. This is your mind giving you guidelines for life. Do this and you'll be okay. Do that and you're in trouble. The aim, yet again, to help you get what you want and avoid what you don't want. Whatever the category, the take-home message is this. Underlying almost any unhelpful thought or thinking process, our mind's main aim is to protect us, to help us get our needs met, help us avoid pain, or alert us to important things that require our attention. How can we tell if we're hooked, though? When we are hooked, it seems as if our thoughts are commands we must obey or rules we must follow. Harris hopes you're starting to see that negative thoughts, in and of themselves, are not problematic. They don't directly cause stress, depression, or anxiety. It's only when we respond to them in obey mode that problems occur. We talk of being lost, pushed around, or consumed by our thoughts. These metaphorical terms illustrate many of the common side effects of getting hooked, but when we unhook from our thoughts, they lose their power. Sometimes people ask Harris, So, are you saying we should never be absorbed in our thoughts? To which he replies, no. To answer such questions, Harris always comes back to the basic ACT principle of workability. Is this working to help you build the sort of life you want? There are plenty of times when it's useful and life enhancing to be absorbed in our thoughts, when we're making plans, memorizing something important, or pleasantly daydreaming. But when we're caught up in our thoughts in a way that's taking us away from the life we want, then it's time to unhook. So let's look at his all time favorite method for unhooking from thoughts. I'm having the thought that. Please read the instructions, then have a go. First, bring to mind an upsetting self judgment thought that takes the form of I am X. For example, I am not good enough. If you can't think of a self judgment, use a recurring worrying instead. For example, it's all going to be horribly wrong. Now focus on that thought and buy into it as much as you can for 10 seconds. Next, take that thought and in front of it insert the phrase, I'm having the thought that. Play that thought again, but this time with the phrase attached. Silently say to yourself, I'm having the thought that I am X. Notice what happens. Now do that again, but this time with a slightly longer phrase. I notice I'm having the thought that X. Notice what happens. Did you do it? Remember, you can't learn to ride a bike just by reading about it. You actually have to get on the bike and pedal. So what happened, Harris asks. You probably found that inserting those phrases instantly gave you some distance from the actual thought. If you didn't notice any difference, please try again with another thought. You can use this technique with any difficult thoughts that tend to hook you. For instance, if your mind says, life sucks, then acknowledge, I'm having the thought that life sucks. If you prefer, use the term I'm noticing. So when your mind says, I'll fail, you acknowledge, I'm noticing the thought that I'll fail. Using these phrases means you can step back and see those thoughts for what they are, words passing through your head. We can get hooked by positive thoughts too, which readily gives rise to problems like narcissism, arrogance, or overconfidence. I already know everything about this. I'm superior to you are some examples. When we unhook or diffuse, we recognize the following. Our thoughts are sounds, words, stories, or bits of language. Our thoughts are not orders we need to obey. Our thoughts may or may not be important. They may or may not be wise, and they may or may not be true. Well, I think that's enough theory for one chapter. How about we do something more practical? Unhooking techniques galore. There are zillions of different unhooking techniques, and some may seem a bit gimmicky at first. So think of them like training wheels on a bicycle. Once you're able to ride, you no longer need them. Harris expects these experiments will be useful, but as he says earlier, nothing works for everyone. If it doesn't, drop it and move on to another. Remember, as you use these unhooking techniques, the aim is to not get rid of a thought, but simply to see it for what it is, neither struggling with it or getting dominated by it. The first, musical thoughts. Bring to mind a negative self-judgment that easily hooks you. For example, I'm such an idiot. Now, take that thought and silently sing it to yourself to the tune of Happy Birthday to You. Or, if that doesn't work, to the tune of Jingle Bells. And notice what happens. You probably found that putting it to music, your thought isn't hooking you as much. By taking that thought and putting it to music, you saw its true nature. You realize that, like the lyrics of a song, it is nothing more or less than a string of words. Technique 2, name the story. Another simple way to unhook is to identify your mind's favorite stories and give them names. The loser story, or the my life sucks story. When your stories show up, acknowledge them by name. Once you've acknowledged a story, that's it. Just let it be. You don't have to challenge it or push it away. Simply let it come and go as it pleases while you channel your energy into something useful. Technique 3, name the process. A variant of the previous method, name the process is especially useful when you have many different thoughts rapidly showing up. Rather than noticing and naming specific thoughts, you notice and name the thinking process itself. Example, I'm noticing obsessing. There's my mind ruminating. This technique is often helpful to disrupt cognitive processes like worrying, ruminating, or obsessing. Sometimes that is enough to unhook you, but if it doesn't, step two is to drop anchor, which pulls you out of your head and helps you refocus on what you're doing. Harris makes a note here. Practice is essential. In the next 3 chapters, we're going to cover unhooking from thoughts in much more detail and troubleshoot any difficulties you may have. In the meantime, please practice at least 1 or 2 of the methods we've covered such far. I'm having the thought that, my mind's telling me, musical thoughts, name the story, and name the process. In addition, remind yourself frequently of the following. These difficult thoughts are normal. Everyone has them. This is your mind trying way too hard to help. Use these techniques regularly when having difficult thoughts, as often as you possibly can. Anytime you're feeling stressed or upset, you are disengaged, ask yourself, what story is my mind telling me now? And once you've identified it, unhook. And your fallback option, when other methods fail, drop anchor. It's important not to build up great expectations at this point. Sometimes it's easy to unhook, and in other times it seems almost impossible. Don't expect instant transformation. And if all this seems too difficult, acknowledge, I'm having the thought that it's too difficult. It's okay to have thoughts such as, it's too hard, this is stupid, or it won't work. See these thoughts for what they are, chains of words, and let them be. Now that we're into the chapter, I wanted to share my favorite unhooking technique from his examples, which was naming the story. I think that that's really useful. Rather than something like musical thoughts, where it kind of takes a lot of work and you can't always do that when you're around people, naming the story is something that's kind of discreet and private and also really useful. We have these different stories, and just by naming them, it takes away their power. I think that's something that I might try doing and something I would encourage you to try as well. Before we head to the next chapter, thank you so much for reading this chapter with me. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below and subscribe for next Tuesday when we get into chapter 7, Off the Hook. I'll see you next week.